You ever hear about an HOA so desperate for control that they call the cops on a man fixing up his dead father's barn? Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. I'm Ethan Cole, 42 years old, grid engineer by trade, and the last man standing on my family's 150-year-old farm. My dad used to say, "This barn held our stories. You let it rot, you let us rot." So when the roof started sagging last winter, I spent every weekend fixing it. Hammer in hand, sweat dripping, the same way Dad taught me. Then they came, HOA Karen with her clipboard, her iPhone recording, standing at the fence like a buzzard. She said I was violating HOA bylaws, that my hammering was a nuisance, that my paint color was unapproved. I told her, "Karen, this barn's older than your entire HOA. Older than you, me, and your rules." But she didn't care. She wanted control. So one morning, just as I was up on the ladder fixing the weather vane, I hear sirens. I look down, 3 police cars, blue lights flashing, Karen smirking under her sunglasses. "Sir, you need to step down. There's been a complaint." I could feel my blood boiling, but I took a breath. I said, "You're telling me I can't fix my own barn?" The officer looked embarrassed. "HOA says you're creating a public disturbance." I showed them the deed, showed them the property line, but you know how it goes. HOA Karen was screaming about fines, bylaws, safety inspections. I stepped off that ladder, looked her dead in the eye, and I said, "You want to start a war over this barn, Karen? You picked the wrong engineer to mess with." You see, they didn't know. I'm not just a farmer. I manage the local utility grid, the power lines they rely on, the transformers that keep their AC running while they sip wine on their patios. I know every inch of it. I didn't break a single law. I didn't cut their power, but I raised the maintenance cost, legally, based on a review they triggered by filing complaints about visual pollution from my barn. Suddenly, their HOA fees skyrocketed, utility costs climbed, and Karen, she was too busy explaining to her neighbors why their bills doubled to harass me again. And that barn, I finished it, red, strong, and standing tall against the sunrise. Because here's the truth, friend. You don't let bullies take your legacy. You don't let cowards erase your family's story for property values. If you think HOA Karens deserve a reality check, hit that like button and let me know. Comment legacy if you stand for protecting your family's land too. Because this was just the start. Karen thought she could control the grid engineer who feeds her power. She was wrong. They thought I would stop. They thought those sirens would scare me off that ladder forever. But here's what Karen didn't know. My dad taught me about resilience with every nail we hammered together in that old barn. When I was 12, he said, "Ethan, if you ever see a bully trying to take what's yours, you don't back down, you build stronger." So after the cops left, I climbed back up that ladder, hammer in one hand, paintbrush in the other. Neighbors peeked out from behind blinds, recording on their phones, whispering, and Karen, she was there again, fuming. The next day, she called code enforcement, said my historic structure was an eyesore, that my repairs violated setback requirements. So I pulled out the original land survey, dated 1892, signed by the county. It showed that the barn was exactly where it was supposed to be, long before her HOA even existed, but she kept pushing, emails, threatening letters, HOA fines showing up in my mailbox, $500 for unauthorized repairs, $1,000 for nuisance construction. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I walked into that HOA meeting, boots still dusty from the field, holding the survey map and my property deed. The room went quiet when I stepped in. Karen started talking about community standards, about property values. I unrolled that survey on the table, pointed at her with my calloused hand, and said, "You see this? This is older than every house in your HOA. This barn has stood through storms, wars, and generations, and it will outlast your threats too." The silence was deafening. A few neighbors started nodding. They were tired too, tired of the petty fines, tired of Karen's power trips. But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, I woke up to find a giant stop work notice nailed to my barn. I stood there holding that bright orange paper in my hand, shaking with anger, because that barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was my dad's memory, my family's legacy, and I wasn't about to let some HOA bully erase that. I called my lawyer, and I called the County Historical Preservation Office. Turns out, Karen made a big mistake. She tried to claim the barn was a new structure, but it was on the historical register, even if it wasn't fancy. That meant her HOA had no jurisdiction. The county sent a letter back to the HOA, warning them of legal repercussions if they continued harassment, and the stop work order torn down piece by piece. You should have seen Karen's face when she realized she lost. She thought her clipboard and threats would scare me, but I've stared down storms that shook the rafters of that barn. I wasn't going to bow to her. And that was just the start, because when you push a man protecting his family's legacy, you better be ready for what comes next. Hit like if you're tired of HOA bullies thinking they can rewrite history. Comment barn stands if you believe in protecting family legacy. Want to know how I turned her entire HOA against her using her own paperwork? That's coming next. The county letter rattled Karen more than she'd ever admit. She stopped coming to my fence, stopped glaring as I carried lumber across the yard, stopped calling the cops every time I fired up the power tools. But you know what happens when people like her get quiet. They scheme. One morning, I found a letter stuffed under my door. No stamp, no return address, it said. The HOA will never accept your eyesore in this neighborhood. Sell now or pay later. For a second, I felt that chill run down my spine. Then I remembered who I was building this for. Dad's memory, my family's future, my promise that no one would erase what we built. I set up cameras around the barn, every angle covered, night vision on. I wasn't about to let pay later happen without receipts. 2 nights later it happened, rustling outside, footsteps. My phone buzzed, motion detected. I opened the app, and there they were, 2 figures, hoodies up, flashlights scanning the barn's walls, spray paint in hand. They started tagging the barn with red paint, sell, ugly, get out. I stayed quiet, recording. Then, one of them turned. The flashlight caught their face, and there was no mistaking it. It was Karen's son. The same one who parked his lifted truck across my driveway to teach me a lesson. The same one who laughed when the cops tried to scare me off. I didn't call the cops that night. Instead, the next morning, I printed those security camera images and walked them right into the HOA meeting. Karen was there, acting like she owned the place. Clipboard in hand, fake smile on her face. I walked straight up to the table, laid out the photos, and let them all see. Her son, spray can in hand, vandalizing a historic structure. Karen's face went pale. A few neighbors gasped. A couple even pulled out their phones to take pictures of the evidence. She stammered something about misunderstanding and teenage prank, but this wasn't a prank. This was intimidation, harassment, a felony. The HOA president looked at Karen, then at me, and asked me what I wanted. I took a deep breath. I want every fine you've tried to slap on me cleared. I want a public apology for the harassment, and I want assurance you'll never come after my family again. Karen tried to protest, but the room was done with her. They were tired of the power trips, tired of the threats, tired of living under her rule. And when the HOA president looked around the room, seeing nodding heads, he realized the tide had turned. They cleared my fines on the spot, issued a formal apology, and suspended Karen and her son from any HOA involvement pending further investigation. Karen tried to glare at me as she left the meeting. But it wasn't the glare of a queen holding power anymore. It was the look of someone who finally realized, you can't bully a man who's fighting for his family's legacy. And the barn, I finished painting it that weekend. Bright red like Dad always wanted. New roof, new doors, same soul. Every nail I drove in was a promise that our family's history wouldn't be erased, that the barn would stand tall for another 150 years. They tried to tear it down with fines, fear, and threats, But in the end, the only thing that fell was their illusion of control, and that was just the beginning. Want to know how Karen's entire world collapsed after that HOA meeting? How her son's actions exposed deeper HOA corruption that rocked the entire neighborhood? Karen thought it was over. She thought losing face at the HOA meeting was the worst it could get. She was wrong. Because once neighbors saw the truth, they started talking, and you know how small towns are. Word spread fast. People started sharing stories about Karen's intimidation tactics. Fines for flowers that were too bright. Threats over kids' bikes left on sidewalks. Late night letters shoved under doors. And then came the receipts, literally. One neighbor found HOA checks signed by Karen, but made out to a landscaping company no one had ever seen working. Another neighbor discovered administrative fees that went into an unlisted bank account. And when folks checked the HOA official charter, they found amendments scribbled in pencil. No votes recorded, no signatures, just Karen's handwriting. It was fraud, and everyone saw it now. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. People who never showed up before were there, arms crossed, ready to demand answers. I stood in the back, letting them have their moment. Karen walked in, wearing that same smug look she always did, clipboard in hand, trying to act like nothing was wrong. But this time, the HOA president didn't let her speak first. He stood, cleared his throat, and said, "Karen, you're under investigation for fraud, harassment, and embezzlement." You could hear a pin drop. Karen's mouth fell open. She stuttered, tried to laugh it off, but no one was laughing. Not this time. Then 2 county deputies walked in. They approached Karen calmly and asked her to come with them. Karen demanded to know what this was about. They simply said, "You know." And that was it. Karen was escorted out of the meeting she used to rule. Neighbors watched in silence, some filming on their phones, others shaking their heads. I'll be honest, I didn't cheer. It wasn't about revenge for me. It was about finally stopping the cycle of fear. After Karen was gone, the room exhaled. People hugged. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years started making plans to clean up the park, repaint mailboxes, and actually help each other. A new HOA committee was formed, one focused on community, not control. Fines were reviewed, bogus charges dropped, and that scribbled charter, it was tossed out, replaced with fair, transparent bylaws. My fines were wiped clean. Neighbors even offered to help finish the last repairs on the barn. Some brought over paint. Others helped replace the broken fence Karen's son had smashed. And my barn, it became more than a building. It became a symbol, a reminder that you don't have to bow down to bullies, even if they're hiding behind a clipboard and HOA title. I stood on the porch of that barn one evening, looking over the field Dad and I once baled hay on. The sunset hit the red paint just right. I could almost hear Dad's voice, proud and calm. "Good job, son." Karen thought she could break us with threats and fake power, but she forgot one thing. This land doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to everyone who stood up to her. Everyone who chose community over fear. Everyone who remembered what neighbors are supposed to be. So if you're dealing with a Karen who thinks her HOA title makes her untouchable, remember this. They only have power if you let them. Stand your ground. Know your rights. Document everything. And don't let anyone erase your history. Because your family, your home, and your legacy are worth protecting. Just like that old barn. And that, my friends, is how we stopped Karen and saved a 150-year-old promise in the process.